also want to add this about Kim Hunt. And I was telling Tony this: when everyone is vaccinated and we can get back to normal, you have to go up to Kim and you have to ask if she will hug you. It is a hug that you feel in your soul. It makes you feel so good inside. She hugs your soul. So next up, the soul hugger herself, Kim Hunt.
I love that. Thank you so much, Ken. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here with everyone. Really thrilled about this. Okay. So when I'm sitting at this desk, my father stares at me from what for years I assumed was his driver's license. It was the only thing I wanted when I picked through his belongings as he laid at his hospital bed in 2010. The card has my grandparents' address on it, which is where he lived until he moved into subsidized senior housing. His height is listed as 5 feet 7 inches, weight 140 pounds, eyes brown, birth date 10/27/39. In the picture, he's wearing a plaid open collar shirt. His paper bag colored face is framed by a graying beard. His small afro is squished, as though he'd snatched his painter's cap off right before this picture was taken. His eyes are bloodshot, and the smirk on his face says he would rather be doing something else. From the moment I found this card amongst the relics of my father's life, what first struck me was that he was leaning such that his afro touched the upper left corner of the picture. I had a lot of experience reading that lean. It told me that in this photo, taken in the middle of the day, my father was drunk. I recently discovered that the card that has taunted and comforted me is not a driver's license. It's his Missouri state ID. And that makes much more sense. I only know of 2 times that my father has driven. The first was when I was 9 and my sister was 7. We'd spent the weekend with him as we did occasionally from the time our parents divorced when I was 3 until we were old enough to conveniently have other things to do. My dad had borrowed a friend's car to drive us from my grandparents' house to our home about 3 miles away. And I can still feel my sister's hand in mine in the back seat in the dark as the street lights revealed our mirrored terror while our father zigzagged his way down streets, abruptly stopping just past our house. My sister and I grabbed our things and ran inside as he was saying, I love you. He and our mother apparently had words about this incident because from that point on, she dropped us off and picked us up whenever we spent a weekend with him. The other time was told to me when my sister, by my sister, long after we'd grown up. She told me about an evening when my father was having dinner with her and her family, and after taking the last sip of his ever present Canadian mist, he picked up their car keys, got into the car, and backed it out of the driveway and right into a tree. Now, fortunately, no one was hurt. Often, the narrative about Black families is that fathers are absent from their kids' lives. And that's not the reality for many, and certainly wasn't for me. In fact, my father was sometimes too present. His drunken appearances at birthday parties, graduations, and other celebratory events trained me to be disappointed by him from a pretty early age. But to my mother's credit, she wasn't critical of him while I was growing up. So the disappointment that I felt towards my father was my own. In the late 1970s, as I was entering high school, my mother used a Section 8 voucher to move us into a large house on one of Kansas City's boulevards. It was the first time my sister and I had a bedroom large enough for two, and the house included 2 bathrooms, a den, and a separate dining room, and it felt like a palace. But there were moments when my father dampened our joy. Our place was about 4 blocks from my paternal grandparents, where my sister and I would occasionally make stops on our way home from school, always careful to leave before our father got there. Eventually, he began to pop up at our house unexpectedly on weekends. He'd just walk over, see what we were up to. And I never had the sense that he was trying to get back with my mother. They'd been divorced for 10 years by then. I felt like he was just trying to be a dad to my sister and me, but the smell of alcohol shut out any possibility for me to connect with him. Instead, I avoided him, a technique that I continued to employ well into adulthood. One Saturday night, our mother allowed us to have friends over while she worked one of her extra jobs. And at about 9:30, while we were in the den watching television, someone knocked on the door. Now, we were experienced latchkey kids, so we had no intention of opening it. We heard knocking again, and then a voice. Hey, it's your father, let me in. In unison, my sister and her friends sprinted out of the den, down the hallway, and up the stairs to the second floor. They had to run past the very door my father was knocking on. There was a curtain over the glass at the top, but I realized as I trailed behind them that with the light on in the upstairs bathroom, he could see them running. I could not bring myself to run up the stairs, so I sat down and just stared at the door. Hey, what's going on? He yelled. I sat. Come on, Kim, my sister and her friend stage whispered from the shadows upstairs. Run. I couldn't move. Backlit from the stairs above, my father had a clear view of me through the green haze of the curtain. Come on and open the door for your pops, he said, using the nickname he gave himself, but that my sister and I never used. I just sat and stared at the door, happy that it was locked and afraid to look up to see my father looking down at me. Shit, I heard him say with a slight slur from the other side. The screen door slammed and he was gone. I didn't let my father walk me down the aisle when I got married in 1985. I did ask him to wear a tux because I wanted him to be in the photos, but I thought if a male was going to give me away, my younger brother should have the job. My father looked quite handsome standing next to my mother. His smile quivered as tears ran down his cheeks, and I knew he was happy. And I also knew that he was sad, that he wasn't taking this walk with me. And I realized that I'd given in to a little girl's desire for revenge. I'd fucked up. But I didn't stop trying to hurt or ignore my father until I was good and grown. I began to give him an inkling of grace as I learned how absolutely humbling parenting could be when my family began to grow. I came out to my mother first. Actually, I first had to tell her I was getting a divorce. Then I added that I was pretty sure I was a lesbian. I had reconnected with my best friend from college during a work trip. Things happened, and I felt like I'd finally found myself and I couldn't turn back. I'm sure she was shocked, but what my mother said was, life is short. When you find love, you should go for it. It was late when I called, but that conversation had me feeling so good that I wanted to call my father right away to get it over with. And while my family slept upstairs, I took a deep breath and then punched my father's number into our black cordless phone as I sat at the kitchen table in the dim light of the stove. After he answered, I let the words free fall from my mouth. So we're getting a divorce because I realized that I've always been in love with my best friend from college, even when I was walking down the aisle. And we reconnected when I was on a business trip. And now I'm sure, so I'm getting divorced. I waited. His response was, so I wanted to make sure he heard me. So I repeated what I said a little louder this time and added that I was a lesbian in case he didn't make the connection. So what? I still love you. I was stunned. After we said our goodbyes, I called my mother back immediately and told her how my father had responded. And she wasn't surprised. In fact, she told me that my father was around gay men all the time. In high school, his best friend's brother was gay, and when the kids teased him or tried to beat him up, my father always defended him. By the late 1990s, when I was well into my 30s, my mother and father bonded over their cancer treatments and dominoes. She'd been diagnosed with breast cancer. For him, it was throat cancer. The day of his diagnosis, he stopped smoking and drinking cold turkey. And that was pretty remarkable because he'd been doing both since at least high school. And given that my mother had access to great health care and my father had treated his body like shit for his entire life, my sister and I were pretty sure that he'd die first. We were wrong. My sister died unexpectedly before both of them. And 3 years later, my mother died. My father didn't die from cancer. He had a damn stroke. I was surprised to see him awake when I arrived from Chicago the day after my cousin called in July 2010 to tell me that he'd been hospitalized. The room was packed with my aunts, uncle, and some cousins, and I gave my dad a big hug. He hugged me back and told me he loved me. Shortly after I settled into my family's comforting banter, the doctor motioned for me to join her in the hallway. She let me know that despite my father's alert greeting, too much time had passed between when he had the stroke and when he arrived at the hospital. I could decide ahead of time if I wanted the hospital to put him on a ventilator when the time came, or I could let him die at his own pace. I appreciated that she said die, not let go or pass. I had my dad admitted to the same hospice where my mother took her last breath. And for 3 weekends, I drove 20 hours round trip to check in on my partner and kids, update my employer and grab work, and rent another car for the drive back. People who knew me during this time have described it as living in limbo. But I came to think of it as a time when my daddy gave me roots. Each minute on the road, I worried that I wouldn't make it back before he died. And the crazy thing is, I didn't want to be in the room when he took his last breath. I just wanted to be near him. Thankfully, I was in town when he died with my oldest cousin at his side. And now I have his ID card to remind me of our continuing journey. There's a picture of George Floyd holding his daughter, Gianna, when she was a toddler. And it reminds me of a picture of my dad and me at one of my birthday parties when I was very young. And thinking about Gianna's picture and mine makes me sad that she won't be able to experience the ebbs and flows of the relationship with the first man in her life. It makes me mourn for all the other stories of Black daddies and daughters that will never be told. Thank you.